Okay, let's begin with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father,
hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
okay. We have been looking at the Gospel of Luke from the perspective of the stories of faith that this Gospel contains. We asked Luke a few questions to begin with, like, why did you write this thing anyway? And he told us because he has a benefactor by the name of Theophilus, and Theophilus is a new convert, and he is interested in having his faith deepened, and so he probably has persuaded Luke to do this by putting together a story of Jesus, which Luke is glad to do. We saw a few of the creative things Luke did in his introduction, the way he compares John the Baptist and Jesus by sort of writing two sides of the parchment. Then we saw that once everything got underway, certain things were important. It was important for Luke to tell us that Jesus was baptized because he wants us to understand why he was baptized. And in the story form, as he tells it, that gives Luke an opportunity to tell us who he believes Jesus really is. That's where we had that voice, remember, sort of pop out of the sky, God's voice. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Then no sooner does he get done with that, then we notice he has Jesus go through the same rituals that everybody else that gets a call by God has to go through. Namely, you start out in some form of bondage, then you end up not in some form of freedom, but your second stage is in the wilderness, which is purification. Israel had to go through this. It was 40 years, and Israel failed. And so Luke wants to show us Jesus himself has to go through this trial period. And that's where we get those three temptations of Satan trying to convince Jesus to prove he is the Messiah. And of course, Israel tried to do the same thing. They failed. Luke wants us to know Jesus did not fail. All three attempts by the devil did not work. And then toward the end there, remember, we got this little passage that said, and nothing and no one can hurt Jesus until an opportune time. That means the time when Judas is going to show up at the Last Supper. But in the meantime, we notice that Jesus finally goes home to kind of give his inaugural address. Luke told us that he borrowed that story from Mark, but he's going to use it in a much different way. Mark used the story to show the recalcitrant attitude of the people of Jesus' hometown. They thought he was a fraud. They didn't like the fact he left. They didn't like the fact he came back. And so Mark wants to spend most of his time emphasizing that. Luke is not so much interested in that. He's interested in having Jesus say out loud why he has come. What is his mission going to be? And so Luke puts that story within the context of a synagogue service where Jesus is invited to read a passage, which he does from the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 61. It's all about the corporal works of mercy. That's what the Messianic age is all about, people caring for and helping one another. And so that's what's so significant for Luke anyway in terms of what Jesus is about to do. But Luke also includes the fact that once Jesus has read that little passage, and then he sits down, and then all of a sudden we're told, and all the eyes in that place were fixed on him. And then the whole thing starts to come unraveled because he says, and of course Jesus is not innocent here. He knows what he's doing. He's pushing their buttons. And they don't like to be pushed. But he could care less. He's got his ideas of what he's going to do. And so once the thing gets underway, and he reads that passage and he sits down and they're waiting to see who he's going to quote. Remember, it's whoever has the most rabbis, even if they don't agree with one another, speaks with the most authority. So we're sitting here wondering who he's going to tell us are his influential rabbis, and instead he kind of floors us by saying, today this passage has been fulfilled in your hearing. Well, everybody knew what that meant. That meant what he just said was, I am the one that this passage is about. I am the prophet who is going to fulfill all these corporal works of mercy because I am the Son of God and I am the Messiah. And we notice now that the crowd kind of goes a little berserk. And he tells them, he pushes it even further. You would think, okay, he's upset them. You pushed your buttons, now back off a little bit. No, not him. He's going even further. And he tells those two stories, remember, about how there were many, many Jewish people who needed food, many, many Jewish people who could be healed of their leprosy. Who does God pick to heal those people? And both cases were Gentiles, not Jews. Well, that would just outrage the people. That would just make them go berserk, which they do. And they eventually tried to get him on top of a hill so they can throw him off and kill him. But remember, nobody's going to be able to hurt him until an opportune time. So after that story, Luke continues with a lot of healing stories, miracle stories, that in and of themselves don't prove Jesus is God, but they show his concern for healing. He's a little leery of that because one of his major concerns is, I do not want to be understood and known as just one more great miracle worker. Miracle workers are important, and there were lots of them. A miracle worker was a person who had a personal life of holiness and therefore could be God's mediator. A miracle was the mediation of power. Notice, no one ever accuses Jesus of not being able to do these things. What they do accuse him of, however, is the source of his power. They say, oh yeah, you can do all that stuff. You can cure those withered arms and all that stuff, but you're using the power of the devil. Now we know better than that because we know he just defeated the devil a few passages earlier. But most of the people would not have understood how all that works. But he doesn't want to be just a miracle worker, and so he always downplays that. He does miracles because he's compassionate. He's imitating God, who is also merciful and compassionate. So he finds people who need help, he helps them. But his disciples love that stuff. They love the power, the miracle. They think he should set up shop. And he always says that's not what we are about. We're about something else. So he gets on the way and tries to disclose what that is. In chapter 4, the end there, Luke gives us a little interesting vignette. At daybreak, he departed, went into a deserted place, and the crowds were looking for him. They liked his miracles. That's what they're looking for. And when they reached him, they wanted to prevent him from leaving them. But he said to them, I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to the other cities also, for I was sent for this purpose. His purpose is to proclaim the good news, not just to do miracles. So he continued proclaiming the message in the synagogues of Judea. Okay, so we got a sense, getting a sense of this Luke fella and what he does, how he writes. But we still want to know some more. We might say, okay, let's talk about these stories of faith you've been talking about. What is that again? Why are you using that phrase, and what does that mean? We're not quite sure how to think about that. And what we really would like, what's some of your favorite stories? What stories in all of this do you like? Would you emphasize? And so, assuming that he would listen to that, he might say, okay, well, let's review a little bit. Here's what I mean, Luke, by faith. Now, faith is not one thing, remember. Faith is a series. It's a series of dynamics that when put together collectively create this phenomena that goes by the name of faith. And there are certain elements in it. Here are those dynamics. We've already said them a couple of times, but it's good to hear them again. So in stories of faith, here's what's going to be emphasized. Risk. All kinds of risk are involved in stories of faith. Boldness. Stories of faith show us people who do things beyond the pale. They're always pushing the boundaries. Confidence. They believe they can do this. They believe they can do this by making it happen. And that confidence leads to a sense of empowerment, the empowerment of God's grace. And the ultimate thing after empowerment, they're changed. Stories of faith. The dynamics of faith changes people. And the last category, of course, is transformation. So, risk, boldness, confidence, empowerment, transformation. That's what the life of faith is about. So, once he tells us that, he says, okay, keep that in mind, remember that. Oh yeah, you want to know a story, right? Yeah, that's what we said. We'd like to know a story. Tell us, what's one of your favorite stories that demonstrates those elements? Well, he might scratch his head a little bit. Well, okay, here's one I really like. I put it in my book, I put it in chapter 7. Nobody else has this. You won't find this in any of the other Gospels. It starts in verse 36. I'm not quite sure where I got this story. It'd been circulating a little bit, but all this material that I have had been used before I got a hold of it in the teaching ministry of the church, the catechists. They all had bunches of stuff, If you're a catechist, you might have a little sack of miracle stories, and a little sack somewhere else. Somebody over here's got a sack of parables. I got a sack of controversy story. If you'd ask them, do you know when Jesus said those things? No, don't have an idea. Do you know why? Why he said so? Some of that stuff's pretty interesting. Do you know why he said it? No, they didn't tell me. They just gave me this sack. Well, that's what Luke says. I don't know where this came from, but I know I like it because I think it exemplifies exactly what I'm talking about. So here's the story. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house, took his place at the table. Now here Luke might stop and say, well, let me tell you a few things here. This is not one of those McDonald's drive-through things. This is a formal meal. And I got a bunch of stories that indicate Jesus spent a lot of time eating and a lot of time going to meals, coming from meals. Most of what he taught was in some form of meal context. Some people like to kind of jokingly say, you know, in my gospel, in Luke's gospel, it's the only one where Jesus literally eats himself to death. Okay. So, table fellowship. That's a very important aspect for Luke. He likes to talk about table fellowship and all that goes in there. So, when Jesus gets in and he eats with anybody, and that just drives people nuts, because you're not supposed to eat with just anybody. You only eat with people who are ritually pure, and you don't ever eat with lepers, tax collectors, prostitutes, and any other kind of low life. Well, Jesus didn't get that memo because he eats with, you invite him, he shows up. So here it is, Pharisee. He went to the Pharisee's house and took his place at table. Okay, this was a formal meal, so you had a horseshoe-shaped table. You didn't sit down like the pagans do. You reclined at table. You had little sofas about 10 inches off the ground. Your sofa was looking at the table because that's where the food was going to be. And you could see over here. You could see maybe over here. You could see back there. But you can't see who's behind you. The logistics of this. The table is open at one end. That's where the servants are going to. Exactly, the head honcho at these meals, he would be in the middle, and whether the guests of honor would be over here or over here, it's not quite clear. There's an amazing amount of information on table fellowship. If you just type it in Google, you'll learn more than you need to know. But it's very important. So, we're there. We had been told certain things before we got there in the invitation we got. One would be, remember, when you come to the meal, ritual purity. Make sure you are ritually pure. And you can get impure for all kinds of things, not all of them negative. You might walk out that door and there's a little bird carcass and you stumbled on the bird carcass while you're impure. Well, there's some rituals you've got to do to get that done. And that's not a real big, tough thing to do. But the important thing is be pure when you come, because if you touch somebody and they know you're impure, then they become impure and they're going to be real angry because you chipped them out of their meal. So, got to be ritually pure. So, you'd be there. We don't know why he was invited, but he was. So he's there. If you're the host, you're the Pharisee, you have one goal in mind in this whole meal setup. You want it to come off without a hitch, because that's the honorable thing. And remember the two polarities we always look for in these stories, the notion of honor and shame. Remember, honor is the greatest virtue that we have. We learn about honor at home. That's what it means to be a good, holy, honorable person. And we would have been taught from early age on, everything you do in life, do for honor. And always do all you can to prohibit shame from entering in. Anything that diminishes honor is called shame. Those are the two poles around which everything sort of in their culture worked, honor and shame. To be honorable would mean this meal came off perfect. Everybody did what they were supposed to do. The food was great. The conversation was wonderful. We all had a terrific time. That's the goal. And a woman in the city who was a sinner, having learned that Jesus was eating in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster jar of ointment. That ain't good. That woman, a sinner. How do we know that? Well, it doesn't tell us yet, but we think we know. What do you mean by sinner? We know what we mean by sinner. This is not one of those, well, she didn't say her morning prayers and her evening prayers. No, that ain't sinner. We know what we're talking about here. Luke likes to do this. He thinks, people are going to get upset. They'll say, this is religious holy writing. We don't talk about those. Yes, we do. Luke does anyway. So this woman, everybody's looking at her, of course. How'd she get in? Well, these were open air affairs. You just kind of walk in. We're all looking at her now. The poor Pharisee, think of him. He wanted this to come off without a hitch. He hadn't even started yet, and there's a big hitch right now. But there's more. A woman of the city who was a sinner, having learned that Jesus, was eating in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster jar of ointment. She stood behind him at his feet. How does she know him? That'd be the first thing we'd want to know when we look. Look, there she comes in. There's him, and she goes right. She knows him. It's not accidental. She knows him. And we're already building up an image in our mind who she is. This is not looking good. She stood behind him at his feet. Now we could say, if we wanted to be generous and give him the benefit of the doubt, he can see out here, he can see over here, he can't see in back of him. She's back there at his feet. She stood behind him at his feet, weeping. Well, why is she weeping? Doesn't say, just that she is. And began to bathe his feet with her tears and dry them with her hair. Well, that's a loaded sentence. So she's back there. Now she's tired. She's crying. And the tears are obviously falling on his feet. Now he must know it's probably there anyway, not raining. That's where is this coming from? Obviously from her. She began to bathe his feet. Well, see, we all know that that's a shameful thing. We were always taught from early on, you never, ever in public, if you are an adult, you never touch another adult's feet. For whatever reason, you don't ever do that. That is shocking. That is shameful. Now, if you want to show somebody honor, glory, whatever, and you go into a private place, a private home, private room, then close the door, pull the blind, whatever, we don't care. That's okay. When Jesus washes the feet of his disciples, that's not on the public park bench. That's behind closed doors in a separate room. That's considered fine. You can do that. Don't do that outside here where everybody... We have those same policies, most of us, where we live. There are certain things that inside your homes and whatnot, you can do that, but you don't do them out on the park bench. Well, they're out here on the park bench, and we don't like it. So she bathed his feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. Well, you see, if you were a woman, from about the time you were 2 years old or older, you would hear this all the time. Now remember, when you grow up, meaning, 10, 11, 12, 13, never, ever do you go outside here without a male companion of some sort, boyfriend, husband, wife, whoever, but never go outside with your hair hanging down. Your hair always has to be pinned up. When you go to the temple, when you go to wherever you happen to go, the well especially, the well was like a truck stop, so you make sure you're always with some adult male, and your hair is always pinned. If your hair is hanging down, you might as well have a big neon sign saying prostitute and available. So hair always pinned up. Well, her hair is obviously not pinned up. And you see, when she walked in that door, we all looked and we could see the hair's hanging down. Well, that's a no-brainer. And then once the hair was hanging down and we put two and two together, and then she walks right over there and she's standing behind him, weeping for whatever reason. And what's he doing? He's doing nothing. What's he supposed to do? Well, he's supposed to jump up the first time he felt that first tear and look around and at least put us at ease. I don't know who she is. Yeah, she didn't fall. I don't know. We'll get out of here. Sorry, I didn't mean to. But he doesn't do anything. He's just laying there like a log. So to dry her feet with tears and to dry them with her hair. So she's touching the feet in public, which she never ever should do, and she's touching the hair, which should not be down. And you think, well, I guess it can't get worse. Wrong. Then she continued kissing his feet. Well, that's it. Lucky for us, they haven't served the meal yet. We couldn't eat after this. This is more than we can handle. Think of the poor Pharisee. I mean, his world has just crashed all around. It doesn't seem like it could get worse. She continued kissing his feet and anointing them with the ointment. Now, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw it, he said to himself, now he's always the honorable person, says to himself under his breath. If that'd be me, I'd be yelling and loud as I could, I'm going to make sure everybody knew I didn't want anything to do with this. But not the Pharisee. He just very, very honorably says this under his breath. Except Luke might tell us if we'd ask him, but in his gospel, don't whisper anything under your breath because Jesus can hear it. He's able to some way, he'll hear what you said. So when the Pharisee who had invited him saw it, he said to himself, if, now this is an if clause contrary to fact, which means I don't believe that this guy's anybody now. Maybe he was invited because they thought he was a prophet, and that would be interesting to invite a prophet to lunch and so forth, but now he's not a prophet, we know that. If this man were a prophet, so the Pharisee says, he would have known who and what kind of woman this is, who is touching him, that she is a sinner. Jesus spoke up and said to him, Simon. First time we hear the Pharisee's name. First time Jesus has said anything also. Simon, I have something to say to you. To which if I were me, I'd say, you better have a lot to say to me, bud, because you have just destroyed this whole event. But he's not that way. He's honorable. Simon is honorable. Teacher, he replied, speak. So now he's going to speak, and we're all listening. We want to hear how this all has unfolded and why. So here's what Jesus says. A certain creditor had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debts for both of them. Now which of them will love him more? To which we would say, and who cares? This ain't what we wanted to hear about. We wanted to hear about all these shenanigans that we're making up in our mind if they're not true, but you could explain to us how all this happened. Instead, you tell us some stupid riddle about two people who owe money. Who cares? Now, which of them will love him more? But of course, Simon, being the gentleman, the honorable person, he answered, I suppose the one for whom he canceled the greater debt. Jesus said to him, you have judged rightly. Big smile on his face. Nobody else is smiling though. We need to know, Luke would say, I forgot to tell you something. When you got your invitation, you might have not paid that much attention to it, but there was a kind of a reminder in there when you come to the meal. Before the meal actually begins, remember, bring your riddle. And we think, do what? Bring your riddle. Well, what's that? Well, when we get together, we're not going to do small talk. We don't do a small talk in these meals, which is wonderful for me because I don't do small talk. A riddle. And then when we all gather around the table, the host will tell his riddle to each person. Now here's the rule of thumb. Even if you know the answer to the host's riddle like you know the back of your hand, give the wrong answer. This will build up his ego, and so everybody knows this is fixed, so that's not any problem. But, we will all, ha, ha, oh man, are you smart? You know everything. Boy, I don't know anything. I'm really dumb. But, so that's the way it's supposed to work. And the host would tell his riddle. We'd all give the wrong answer. Then it would be our turn after we all went around and affirmed how smart the host was. Then we would tell him a riddle, and that's a riddle we're supposed to bring to the meal. And when we would tell him the riddle, the warning we would get is even if he gets the wrong answer, way wrong, tell him it's the right answer. And we'll, you're so smart, and on and on. Well, we're way beyond riddle time in this meal. We don't care one hoot about what riddle and so forth. But apparently, Jesus brought his riddle, and he's going to tell it, and he did. And we didn't think it was very funny at all. You have judged rightly. So now we're pretty much at wit's end with him. We don't know what's going on here. But, this is pretty interesting. But turning toward the woman, Jesus said to Simon, so everybody's going to listen now, Simon's there, the woman's over here, maybe. So he's looking at her, Then turning toward the woman, he said, Simon, you see this woman? Do we see this woman? We can tell you everything about this woman. We haven't seen anything but this woman since she walked in the door. Then he said to the woman, looked toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? Now here's the deal, Simon. I entered your house. You gave me no water. Well, see, we'd all have known when we go to a formal meal, everybody would have known you have the same ritual every time. You go to the entryway, somebody from the house will greet you with a sign of peace, a kiss of peace. That's part of hospitality. No one would ever think about eliminating that. Then once you got your sign of peace, you'd be led to another room and there'd be all these pails of water. And there you would be told, here's where you wash your hands and your feet. And we would expect that. That's what not to do that would be violating the hospitality rule. Thirdly, we'd be led to another room where there'd be these vases of big, fragrant oil, India oil, probably the kind of stuff that really costs a lot of money and really is very Aramaic. And that's good because these are outdoor affairs, so there's bugs outdoors. Fragrant oil was used to keep the bugs away, and they also didn't have our preoccupation with hygiene. So if you're going to be out in the sun eating meals, elbow to elbow with somebody for a couple hours, a little fragrant oil will go a long way. So, but you would never even consider not providing those three gestures of hospitality for a guest. But Simon, I entered your house. You gave me no water. No water for my feet. But she has bathed my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. Well, we know that. Certainly you're not trying to tell us somehow this woman is the ideal host because she provided that thing, and Simon somehow is going to be the villain now because somebody in his household messed up. But she has bathed my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. Sounds like he thinks that's good. We certainly don't. You gave me no kiss. Strike two. No kiss. But from the time I came in, she has not stopped kissing my feet. Yeah, we know that. That's for sure. You did not anoint my head with oil. Strike three. It'd be very rare would someone eliminate all three gestures of hospitality. Now, Simon himself didn't have to do it, but he had to see that it was done. And so it looks like he's trying to turn this thing upside down, that now this woman that we all know is a floozy, we saw that when she walked in, and we still don't know the relationship between him and her, but we're thinking there is one. And now all of this, no gestures of hospitality, and it sounds like he is trying to say she is the ideal host, and Simon, who everybody looks upon as the ideal host, he really messed up here. Then we stop a minute and we think, well, remember that riddle that we thought was so stupid? Remember how that went? Certain creditor had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii. You could never, ever pay that back. You suppose that's the woman? The other, 50, you could pay that back. Suppose that might be Simon? When they could not pay, he canceled the debts for both of them. Now, which of them will love him more? The woman? That old fox. This was not just some old random riddle he picked out of the back of his pocket. He had this prepared. He knew exactly what he was doing. This is not anything stupid. He knew exactly what he was doing. We missed it, of course. We missed it. And here's the clicker. Therefore, he says, looking at Simon, I tell you, her sins, which were many. So we're not denying that she has committed many sins. But here's the key, and there's no way you'd get this in English. Her many sins have been forgiven. Have been forgiven is in the perfect tense in Greek, passive voice. And when the perfect tense is used, the perfect tense is used to describe an action that has begun in the past and continues, or is done in the past and finished in the past. If you want an action that started way in the past, but it's still going on today, you use a tense called the imperfect. Now, the reason that's important is because by using the perfect tense, what Jesus is saying here, as much as you can get it in English, I tell you, her sins, which were many, have been forgiven. That means before she ever walked in this room, her sins were forgiven. She is not a sinner now. Well, nobody told us. Well, maybe you shouldn't have made all those judgments that just by appearance. You thought you had it all down. You could see your hair down, moved right over to him. Yeah, but yeah, you missed all that. Her sins have been forgiven. Now, we don't know when, but apparently he forgave her sins, namely Jesus. And he says, hence she has shown great love. The actions that we said were great sinful actions, certainly shameful actions, Jesus say, no, that's not the case at all. These were honorable actions. These were actions of love. But the one to whom little is forgiven, maybe Simon, Luke might say maybe even you, loves little. Then he said to her, your sins are forgiven. But those who were at the table with him began to say among themselves, who is this who can even forgive sins? See, the orthodoxy of the day said only God can forgive sins. Holy people can do all kinds of miraculous things, but they cannot forgive sins. Only one person in this room believes Jesus is God and can forgive sins, and that's this woman, because she apparently has been forgiven somewhere, sometime by him, and now she is going to pay homage to him for forgiving her sins. And she doesn't care what anybody thinks about it. It's a dangerous move that she made, because she didn't know what was going to happen when she entered that room the way she was, but she entered it. And he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. That last verse tells us this is a story of faith. And all those ingredients that go into the dynamics of faith are in this story. And he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. This, of course, is a magnificent example of storytelling. This, whether Luke liked it as much as I do, I don't know, but I'm giving him all that credit. That this is what it means. These are stories of faith. Now, you can also see in this story, this would be a story I would use if I were going to do a course on the parables. And I would include this story as a parable that Jesus told. And, you know, as a parable, it's got lots of important reversals and all the kinds of things that go into it. But then the question would be, where would the parable show up? What's the parabolic action? We're always looking for Jesus to do something parabolic. And to do something parabolic means to take something that everybody thinks they know and turn it upside down on their head to show them that they really don't know it at all. The parable in this story, I think, comes when the woman goes right behind Jesus, starts weeping, watching his feet with it, all that upsetting us horrendously. And we're saying, we expected him to do something. What did he do? The answer is nothing. That's the parabolic action. What do you mean he did nothing? Well, we wanted him to do something. We wanted him to reprimand that woman. We wanted him to explain to us why we're so uncomfortable with all this stuff that just went in front of us. We want him to believe like we do, and he does not. He let us think all those things, and all of them were wrong, and we thought them based mostly on just appearance. We didn't know this woman, but we made all kinds of judgments. He just laid there like a log and let all this stuff go on around him, which we say would make him impure ritually, and so all other kinds of stuff. But these are house stories of faith. The parabolic action is, we wanted Jesus to save face. That's a big deal with us. We all want to look good. We all want people to think we're good. We got it all together. And we don't. But we don't ever admit that. But here's a situation, and Jesus demonstrates, where doing nothing is doing the most. Because we all expected him to help us save face, to help us alleviate the sinfulness that's so deep-seated in us that we can't do anything else than just judge like this. So, the way I read Luke, I think this is one of the great stories that he would see. It's a wonderful example of what a story of faith is all about. And there are others. And we're going to be looking at, in the time we have left tomorrow and the next day, we'll be looking at some more of these stories. Examples of faith stories, if you want to look yourself. Go open your Gospel of Luke to the so-called story of the Good Samaritan. We're going to look at that as a faith story. There's also the story of the so-called prodigal son, which is really not a story of a prodigal son, but a story of an old man who loses two sons. We're going to look at that because that's really a terrific story of faith. At the end of the gospel, there's this wonderful story after Jesus has been crucified and he's been raised from the dead, but some of his disciples don't know that yet. And you got two guys on the way to Emmaus. They just were at Jerusalem where this whole thing just blew up, and their hopes have been dashed because they thought Jesus was the Messiah and that he would bring about all kinds of changes. And the next thing you know, he's hanging on a cross, gasping for air, and he dies. And so that ruined that. And so they're on the way to Emmaus talking about how difficult this has been for them. And all of a sudden, Jesus appears in their midst. That'll be an interesting story of faith you might want to look at also. And he said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit,